Hey, what's happening, everybody? It's me. I'm back. It's Sunday night, and hopefully you're here joining me. It's Robert Phoenix, and we're going to dive into the cosmos here for the next couple of hours. Sunday night AstroLive. Hey, what's happening, everybody? It's me. I'm back. It's Sunday night, and hopefully you're joining me. It's Robert Phoenix, and we're. I took care of that little issue. Took care of that. So what's going on? How is everyone? We're going to get a few people here, I think, joining us. Just going to kind of let it all hang out, or we'll just hang out. We'll let it all hang out, be a bit much, especially this early in the show. Normally I would play like a piece of music early on, but because I'm on YouTube, that doesn't always work really well. There are these things called copyrights. And I understand copyrights. I get it, But we're living in a time now where, they're talking about universal basic income, and things really, in a lot of ways, having really great value and intrinsically no value at all. And that could be anything from like personal goods to actual, paper money, right? Which we're really going to have to stare down at some point. This whole paper money fiat game is going to come to a crashing halt, collapse, because we all know they want to bring in the digital system. They want to bring in either the palm scan or the retina scan. They may slow play it and go into the phone, because a lot of people are used to using their phone, and you use your QR code to pay. I just went on a trip recently, and I went to California, and at the Austin airport, you can't pay for anything with cash. Not happening. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, we went to the A's game, and I think that was all cash too. I know at the Astros game that I went to early in the year, it was all cash. So they're making this, non-cash. So non-cash at the Astros game, non-cash, I believe, at the A's game in Oakland. And then the airport, non-cash. I did pay cash for something, I think, at the Burbank airport in LA. So that was still kind of a cash money scene. But let's face it, they want to cut the cord with the old casheroo there, and I'm not sure how people are going to deal with that. I mean, they may have it just crashing the economy and just doing it out of, hey, look, this is just where it's at. If you want to transact, you're just going to have to do this now. If you want to have hamburger or a milkshake or whatever, if you need something, this is it. This is how you're going to do it from here on out, or else you're shit out of luck. And in which case we may have a barter economy, a robust barter economy. I mean, that could happen. I mean, the game is going to change. The financial game is going to change. I was chatting with my good friend Masaki, and he thinks that we're headed for a crash in November. Quite possible. I always think that they like to get a holiday season in for money, although I'm sure that they don't really need all that much more money. I mean, how much more can the 0.5% skim off the rest of us? Well, the answer to that is everything. But I don't know if they want to crash things around the holidays. That's my sense. That's my sense. What do we have here? I don't want this. I can get rid of it. But I do, the nodes are shifting. In fact, I'm going to be doing a recording this week with my astro pal, Heather Eland. That's going to be, I think we're going to do it on Wednesday or Thursday. Anyway, we'll have that. She records them. She edits them, and we're going to do an hour. And we're going to specifically look at this transition with the nodes and going from this crazy cycle where it just feels like these nodal points are getting really, really accentuated. Like especially when they get down into these these first decan degrees. It just gets super intense and super concentrated. So those nodes are going to shift in January. And it feels to me like January and later January is really this time, right? This time when the financial game goes through a major crisis. Because if we just kind of move the ephemeris out to January, we're going to have the sun in Aquarius. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Mars will be in Aquarius too, because it starts off in Capricorn. And even that first week of January, first and second week of January, where Mars is in Capricorn, I think Venus is they're right there, they're right together again. The conjunction with Pluto, with Mars, Venus, and the Pluto return for the United States all happening in the first 2 weeks in January, which gives us, basically roughly a 2-year cycle, right? Since the major moment in time, which was the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, where really everything around this starts. It really starts around that Saturn-Pluto conjunction going back into January of 2019. You could go back and look at the eclipse that happened on the 21st of December, which was in 2019. That was pretty significant. I mean, that's when everything starts to happen theoretically in Wuhan. And that eclipse went right across China. And Heather and I, when we looked at that eclipse, we specifically were looking at that part of the world. And we were talking about China, we were talking about Hong Kong, and we kind of were looking at the historical record, or at least what was happening at that time with Hong Kong. And it really felt like, that eclipse would have an impact on Hong Kong. Well, it did, but it had an impact that was inverted, which is kind of interesting. It might be a really good, topic of conversation, when it comes to discussing eclipses, because Hong Kong was nuts. I mean, they were protesting, and by the way, that was being astroturfed in a big way. Really, there was American money and corporate money, American and corporate money behind those protests. That said, you can only astroturf so much if there isn't something there inside of, like, the entity being a collective body or a group of people. No matter how much money you throw at it, you may not be able to do anything. And they tried that in Venezuela, and they tried to astroturf a coup in Venezuela. It just didn't work. I mean, they couldn't get the numbers. They had failed attempts to stir some shit up. I mean, they really had a Bay of Pigs kind of moment. They had these guys that were contractors that got picked up by the Venezuelan Navy. It was really the whole shit show in Venezuela just went sideways. They brought in Elliot Abrams, who is a lifelong, agent provocateur. This guy's a fixer. He goes in and he does dirty work. That's what Elliot Abrams does. And they brought him in, and it was a failed mission, right? So, but they were trying to astroturf this thing. They were trying to create conditions in Venezuela so that people would rise up and revolt against the current communist regime. Well, they were doing a much better job of it in Hong Kong, because almost every single night it was protest. And it just was reaching this fevered pitch. And then the eclipse happens, and then it gets shut down. And how does it get shut down? COVID, the coronavirus, shuts it down. That's all they needed. So, but again, it was part of that eclipse path, and that's where it all begins. There's that eclipse on the 21st of December in 2019. And then they use the whole COVID thing to completely shut down and shutter the Hong Kong resistance movement. And I remember reading that the leader of the movement had been arrested. And it was interesting because it was just like, okay, we're not going to throw any more money and any more resources at this. They were done. Right? They were just, there wasn't any kind of counter, we would call it a counter insurgence, but it was already a counterinsurgence, but it wasn't a counterinsurgence. Like that was done. They moved on, and they were going to say, okay, we'll put our assets and resources elsewhere. So that's really where it starts. But that eclipse really inverted what was going on in Hong Kong, which seemed like, oh my God, these people are gonna break free, right? I mean, every single night they're out there with their umbrellas, and it's all youth, it's all Pluto and Sag kids, and then shut down. And you don't hear anything about it. But then everything kind of moves westward. Well, for China, it would move eastward because that energy would wind up in the United States, and it really begins to take hold on the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. That's when everything changes. Everything changes at that time. And when we move out to the second week of January of 2022, it will be the 2-year, I guess it would, be the 2-year anniversary, which, because I was just trying to bring 2019 into it. It'd be the 2-year anniversary of the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. And there we have another major conjunction happening with Pluto. This time it'll be Mars. And I think the sun comes into play there not long after that. So this is January really of 2022 is going to be a huge month astrologically. We're going to see Mars go into Aquarius. Eventually we're going to see that Mars-Saturn conjunction. We're going to see Mars begin to, early on, by the way, square the true node in Taurus and the south node in Scorpio, which deals with hard money and soft money. That's what, those nodes, that's part of the discussion. Taurus is going to be hard money, hard assets, and then the south node is Scorpio in other people's money, soft assets, loans, fiat lending, refinancing, the reflow market. I mean, everything is really going to be on the table when those nodes shift. And then we get the forceful energy of Mars and Aquarius, and that could go in so many different ways. We're going to talk about Mars tonight, and we're going to talk about a very important. You know what's interesting now? It's like I'm going to use baseball as an analogy. So when you play baseball, theoretically there are 9 innings, right? There are 9 innings. I could use any sport. I could use football, but baseball has a kind of a finite like time or a finite ending to it. And when you get down to those, let's say it's a really important, like Game 7 in the World Series, and let's say the series is tied 3-3, and whoever wins Game 7 wins it all. I mean, you could make similar analogies with football or basketball, but as you get down towards the end of the game, like every possession in basketball really counts. Every snap in football really counts. And then those final innings, those, let's say 9 outs or maybe 12 outs if it's a home team and they fall behind, they have, what they call last legs, right? Those, they become really, really important. Really important. Like you've played a bunch of games before that, you played something, but now there's this kind of, this narrowing in terms of the point of its consummation, right, or culmination. And that's where we kind of are now. And what's interesting is that Fauci used this baseball analogy, and he talked about that we are in the bottom of the 6th, okay? I would say that we're beyond the bottom of the 6th now. I would say that we are in the 8th inning. And these 2 Mars transits that are coming up, and we're going to talk specifically about Mars and Virgo tonight, which I think is very important. And a lot of times when I do shows like this, I don't always focus on, I do focus on transits when we look at the chart of the moment and stuff like that. But I'm specifically going to look at this Mars transit because it's really important. And because it's in Virgo, and because we're dealing with things like health, and Mars is very aggressive, very warrior-like in any manifestation throughout the zodiac. But Mars in Virgo is the health warrior. And we're going to get into it tonight. We're going to look at it. Then where Mars heads after that is going to be Libra, and that's a big transit. That's a really, really big transit, because when you get into Mars and Libra, you get into things like, social causes and very aggressive energy to try to find balance and equilibrium and fairness. And so we're in this really important kind of Mars cycle. And I believe it's around the 13th or 14th of October, if I'm not mistaken, Mars begins its journey behind the sun. Because ever since Mars went into Aries, right, it's been in front of the sun, and we've seen it, throughout all the various interpersonal signs. Well, not transpersonal, but interpersonal. What I mean by interpersonal, like the inner planets, Mars and Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, and here we are just coming out of Mars and Leo and into Mars and Virgo. Those are all personal signs. And so what we've been dealing with Mars are very personal issues as it relates to action, the manifestation of will, energy. And so this has been a really, I think, important year in terms of people personalizing Mars, and not necessarily like putting it out there. But when I mean put it out there, meaning like they're going to attach it and hang it onto something else, right? They're trying to figure out like where is my individual power? Where is my individual expression? How do I marshal my energy in a world where it's seemingly difficult and beyond difficult, like oppressive and demoralizing, right? So early on, like when I started to talk about these Mars transits early this year, my take on it was that you needed to use Mars in order to fortify personal areas of your life. Okay, really important stuff. And if you use Mars correctly, you could build things up, right? So if we go back in time, we started the year off with Mars in Taurus, and it was just that really slow Mars, and it just it started off in January, and the whole thing just pre-election, and then you have January 6th, and it was just like moving through sludge. It was moving through sludge. Mars and Taurus was just plodding, and then we get out of that a little bit, and we move into Mars and Gemini, and things speed up really, really quickly. Theoretically, what you should have been doing is, like with Mars and Taurus, is if you could have gotten beyond the very depressing moment that period in time was triggering for a lot of people, you'd be working on your resources. That would have been the thing to do. Probably if you could have maybe moved on a property or a piece of land, really should have been doing that honestly in 2020. By the time 2021 hits, the Great Migration has happened. And the time to have done any kind of serious property acquisition would have been very early. In fact, 2019 would have been ideal, but very early in 2020, January, February, and maybe March, April. I moved in May, but I did my kind of groundwork to make a move in April, and it was great. There was a lot of inventory on the market, and I don't own a property. I rent, but there's a lot of inventory in the market, and I got a really great place, and that was the time. And that really was the time. By the time you get into July and August, it's like the Oklahoma land grab, when they opened up Oklahoma, and theoretically all these people got in their wagons and their horses and they rode out there. This is my land, right? That's what it became like. And now it's almost impossible. But if you were going to do something in 2021, it really would have been that period in January where everybody was like sort of shocked and stunned and trying to figure out what the hell was going on, and this whole idea of the insurrection and all that stuff, right? You probably could have done okay during that time because a lot of people were really really distracted and kind of reeling and trying to figure out where the country was going to go. And so you could have made use of that. And if you did do that, good on you. You were right in alignment with what you could do with Mars at that time. We got into a bunch of really heavy transits with the Mars-Uranus conjunction, and then the square with Saturn, and Jupiter and Saturn were kind of running side by side at that time, and Mars was just getting expanded and contracted simultaneously. It was a very difficult period, very, very difficult period with Mars. But if you were in a position where you could move on it and look at the acquisition of land or the acquisition of resources, good time, good time. Then it moves into Gemini, and when it moves into Gemini, that's the time. If you haven't moved, time to move, right? Like we had a window. There's another window there. Also, Mars in Gemini is really, really good at learning something else, learning how to do another thing. That's what Gemini represents. Well, I can do this. Well, maybe I could try that. So if you needed to make a pivot in your life, if you were, staring down kind of a dead end position, or you were tired of just being at home and collecting UBI. I mean, that was a time where the other thing that was really interesting too about that Mars and Taurus phase. That's when they had all that activity with Robinhood and AMC and all those stocks that were really being shorted. That's the Mars and Taurus time. So you can see astrology getting worked out here through these larger cycles, which we're really going to look at tonight, especially with Simone Biles' chart. That's a big, big, interesting astrological lesson in terms of transits and just the natal chart in general. So we're going to dive into her tonight, but you can see it, right? You can see where Mars is in Taurus, and there was this kind of massive movement to acquire assets that were being undervalued and shorted, and that's where we got into that Mars Uranus conjunction, squaring Saturn. There's a little guy going up the big guy against the big guy, David and Goliath. Oh, by the way, I just have to say, I hope John Levi is okay. He didn't post a video today, and he didn't speak because he's a Taurus, and he's like clockwork on Sunday morning. Watching John Levi on Sunday morning was like the equivalent of me watching cartoons on Saturday morning as a kid, because it's coming, right? Hey man, I'm gonna get up, I'm gonna get my bowl of cereal, and I'm gonna sit down and I'm gonna watch me some cartoons until about 10:30, 11 o'clock in the morning, when the baseball games begins to come on, the game of the week. So he's kind of like that. He didn't post a video today, so I hope John's okay. And he deserves a week off every now and then. And I hope that's really all it's about. Anyway, so yeah, I mean, Mars and Gemini, it's like learn something new, do something different, adapt, right? Uber adaption with Mars and Gemini. We had this Mars and Cancer phase recently, and that's a time where you get to look at what makes you secure, patching things up, looking at this idea of prepping and kind of being really assertive around Cancerian kinds of boundaries. Like these are really important things, right? You'd be looking at your home and like, how do I use this Mars energy to do something a little more impactful, or patch up my home, or get a few more preps, a few more resources. How can I defend my home? That's the other thing with Mars, right? Mars is home defense in Cancer. How do I defend my home? And maybe if you hadn't got on that train, there was a time to do that. We just got out of Mars and Leo, which has been a very interesting experience, because we started off and we looked at when Mars came into Leo a few weeks ago, and there was that conjunction with the new moon, and I was like, man, it's going to be hot. It's going to be hot. We're going to have some really fucking hot weather, and boom. It was just hellish in the West Coast, and even in Europe, where they were experiencing temperatures that were just uncommon. And Oregon was on fire, and Washington State was on fire, and British Columbia was on fire, and California was incredibly hot, right? So that's where it all started, really, with Mars and Leo. But there was something else with Mars and Leo, which was, we're not going to take it. Right? We're going to realize that we have some power here in this situation, and we're going to use this either consciously or even unconsciously, where it's like, okay, we're going to find courage, we're going to find our heart, and we're going to let people know that we're really not down with this global program. And it's a global program. It's clearly a global program. And if you're not paying attention, well, you will certainly find out very quickly that what we're engaged in here is a global program. A global pogrom is really what it is. And I think this Mars and Leo energy has been really good for us, right? It's really for people. It's been good for people. We've been able to find some courage, especially a country like France, which I always associate with the sign of Leo. I always associate France with Leo. And it's been great for them. They've been really on the front lines of standing up against what I would call medical totalitarianism. And every single day, I mean, they're not going away. They're locked in, and they're so. The thing I love about the French, and I think the French get a bit of a bad rap in some ways, but the thing I love about the French is that in spite of everything that the European Union and the UN has done to all the countries in Western Europe to divest them of their nationality, their kind of their own ethnic and national base, because that's what they've been doing. They've just been pouring people in there. Look at the Kalergi plan. You'll know what I'm talking about. They've been pouring people into Italy and Spain. Yeah, definitely Spain, Italy, France, Germany. You guys know the story. England. So even though they've been doing this, and they've been doing it heavily, this whole thing really began when Neptune went into Pisces in a very big way. And you can just see it was like, oh God, here we go. The global orphans. And they're what? What's really interesting is a long time ago, I read this, God, what was it? Was it Nostradamus? It was either Nostradamus or some other prophet. And they talked it might have been some other prophet, but they talked about how there would be this invasion of Europe by the Muslims, and the man in the blue turban would lead them, right? But what was really interesting was that the language that they used to describe this invasion was boats with pontoons or pontoon-like boats, and there would be like thousands of them. So a lot of people thought, well, not a lot of people, because I don't know who actually read this prophecy other than me, probably a few. Anyway, people who read it, and even my mind, I went there like, okay, so this is kind of weird. Like, what are they going to do? They're going to have like a dinghy navy, and they're just going to kind of storm the beaches of Southern Europe with these pontoon-like rafts and run and raid Europe. That's not what happened. But the description of the craft was spot on. It was absolutely spot on. So yes, that prophecy was correct. Absolutely 100% correct. It just had a different delivery system in a lot of ways. In spite of all that, the French have steadfastly clung to their Francophilia, right? They have steadfastly clung to. I'll never forget one time I was in France, and I was on my way to Italy. I was on a train, and it was the kind of the last stop in France. What's the place? I want to say Ventimiglia or something. Anyway, it was this last stop in France before you cross the border, went into Italy. And the EU was just going to happen. It was just starting to happen. And it hadn't quite taken place yet with France, but it was going to. And I don't speak any French, but I remember having a very rudimentary conversation with an older French man at that railroad station. And he knew a little bit of English. And we had this very simple conversation. And we actually talked about the EU, and we talked about France losing its national identity. And this guy was really sad. And we talked about the end of the franc, and because they used the EU, right, the euro. And I remember being in Germany before they adopted the EU, and I remember seeing the ATMs that were set up for the EU. They weren't even like German ATMs that they were they were like separate EU ATMs. But he was sad. He was really sad because he knew that the sovereignty and the national identity of his country was going away, or had the potential of going away. But the French have done kind of everything in their power, in spite of all these different migrations, and really starting with the Algerians after that Algerian war that they were involved with after World War II, which is really kind of like their Vietnam, even though they were already in Vietnam and then they left. But they've had all these kind of migrational waves. And even with all these migrational waves, they've still somehow managed to stay in their own way decidedly French. And that's what we're seeing, right? We're seeing a country who has not been so denatured and so I'm going to use the word neutered, so that they're just going to sit there and stand there and allow their government to dictate the terms and conditions in which they have been living their lives. And if there's one thing about the French that we all know, is that they love cafe life, and they love going out to eat, and they love shopping at markets to buy food so that they can prepare it at home, or they love some of these great open air markets, which I've been to in Paris, where you can get anything. I mean, they love this stuff, right? It's part of their tradition, part of their culture. And for that government, or the guy who represents that government, to insert the terms and conditions by which they can go and experience these things, they're not going to do it, because it is really kind of the last bastion, I think, for them, for them to hold on to those cultural influences that are part of their life, right? Social, cuisine. It's big. It's more than that, but that's a big, because that's really was like, well, you're not going to be able to go out to these restaurants or be able to go to these markets. You need to get a vaccine passport. And they're just like, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that. In spite of all of the infusion of kind of outside culture, they've steadfastly maintained their identity. So, hats off to France, who a much maligned country in a lot of ways. And by the way, please forgive George W. Bush, who hiked up the tariffs on Roquefort cheese so high that we stopped getting Roquefort cheese. True story, by the way. Very true story. And so what happened was that the United States and France got into a trade war. France wanted their restaurants to buy more French beef. Okay, more French beef. We got plenty of cows here. We want you to buy more French beef. Well, there's a lot of American beef that's exported to France. And France put tariffs on American beef so that they could sell more local beef. That's how the game works, right? So what did Bush do? He fucking tariffed Roquefort cheese through the roof. When I was a kid, you could go to a restaurant and you could order Roquefort cheese, which is different than blue cheese, by the way. You say, well, why don't you just get blue? No, it's not the same. It's not. So you know why? Because Roquefort cheese comes from sheep milk. That's why. It doesn't come from a cow, so it's gonna taste different, right? Every blue cheese, don't get me wrong, I like blue cheese, but it's always got that kind of sharp. It's got that sharp kind of edge to it. That's not the same with Roquefort. And France, please forgive that numbskull for. Joe Biden, if you're listening, Joe, lift the tariff for Roquefort cheese. Do something right for a fucking change, okay? All right. Let's see who we have here. So we're going to get into this Mars and Virgo thing. And by the way, Mars and Leo, again, you just look what happened this last month, man. People found a heart. They found a pulse. All right. So, all right, let's see. Who do we have? Do we have a chat? We got a chat here. Let's see who we have in chat. Okay. Here's my man, Steve. What's going on? The lovely, intelligent Joan S. SRF. Jennifer Rubin, good to see you. I was thinking about you last week. T. Jordan in the house. Mazumink. Hello, Mazumink. Here's my man, Ryan. Gigi, A.B. Lynn. Hello, Gigi. Lapicius. Hey, what's going on? Susie Gemini. Cheryl. Luciano. Marianne Smith. What's going on, Marianne? And that reference, A Beautiful Day Without Fog for a Change, that's a San Francisco reference, by the way. Alabama Barbie, there he is, MD, the man himself, Maurice Demare. My good bud, DJ MC, Michael Sisternina, we'll be seeing you soon. Vigilante, hello, Vigilante JJ, Rain Dong. Miss Nikki's here, up to 77. Let's see who else we have. Gas, 1123. You're digging the blue. I can get away with the blue. With the green screen. Found that out. Let's see, who else do we have? Joe Mama's here. What's going on, Joe? Hope your son is doing more than all right. Hey, my friend Mark is being told to get the car jack for work. I feel like, look, people, there are two things you got to do with this work carjack thing. You've either got to litigate, okay? You've either got to litigate or you got to let them fire you. Do not quit and do not get carjacked. That's it. Do not quit. Do not get carjacked. You either litigate or you make them fire you, in which case you litigate. Do not give up without a struggle. And the problem with the U.S. And I think, by the way, this is one of the reasons why I don't think France, or why I think France has maintained this kind of revolutionary spirit, is that France has not been demoralized. They have not been demoralized. And in the United States, we have been massively demoralized for a long period of time. And we're into that kind of acceptance phase, which is really dangerous. Like once you get into the acceptance phase, post demoralization, yeah, you're 5 minutes to midnight. I don't think France has been demoralized. I mean, I look at their, what happened. I mean, you got maybe Algeria, but that was a long time ago. And they got out of Vietnam. They were smart. They were really smart. Like, we're out of here. You can deal with these guys. You can take over the heroin trade, because they were involved in the heroin trade. That's what they were doing. That's why Marseille was such a big port for heroin. You watch The French Connection. Where do they take you? The very first place they take you is, Marseille. It had been, and still maybe, now, but it had been for a very long time, the point of entry for heroin into France and Europe. And France was in Vietnam, and they were engaged in the heroin trade in Vietnam. And then they leave, and then the U.S. takes it over, and you can see what happened there. But they didn't have a lot of demoralization. And I think they even won the fucking World Cup, right? Which is very moralizing. So I think that's why they've been able to stay on their feet instead of get on their knees, which is this country, body blows. Body blows, body blows, body blows. Okay, who else do we have here? Ricky Ricardo's here. Let's see. Steve Letro, what's going on, Steve? Good to see you. Half Q in the house. Who else do we have? Zero Hedge, what's going on, ZH? Monkey Butt Toenail making their appearance once again. There's Ursilia Pompilio. Ursilia, I got to have you back on my show again. I know I said that again last week, maybe, or the year before, but I gotta have you back on the show. There's the Aquarian extraordinaire, Mr. Rob Chopra. What's going on, Robbie? Charles Mazak. Charles, you have the most interesting Twitter feed. Let's see. Ruben of the Moon, what's going on, Ruben? Beverly Wise is here. I met some base Pluto and Sag kids last night in Little Chicago, of all places. So these Pluto and Sag kids, man, I like them. I really like them. They know the score. They totally know the score. They're the ones that came up with hashtag clot shot. They know what's going on. They totally know. It's very interesting. So I have a child who's in that demographic, and we talked about that demographic specifically, and he said there are two camps. There's the base camp, and then you have the trans camp, and that's kind of really how that generation has sorted itself out. And what's interesting is that whenever you deal with Pluto, you're always dealing with sort of the opposition of Pluto that is impacting that generation. So they're Pluto and Sag. So the opposition to Sagittarius, of course, is Gemini. And when you get into Gemini, you get into this split, right? You're going to get into these two groups that are going to really kind of epitomize in a lot of ways that Plutonian intensity. So, but I do like that group a lot. I think they're every now and then I'll get a Pluto and Sag kid as a client, and boy, dude, they blow me away. I mean, really blown away. Like I'm like, how old are you? You're 19? Jesus. When I was 19, I was a mess. I was a total mess. Well, all these Pluto and Sag kids at 19, man, they have game. They have serious game. All right, let's see who else we have. Windhammer, hello, Windhammer. Renee, hey, Renee. What's going on? There's my man, Masaki. Going to be trekking out to the hill country here pretty soon. Steve has a good comment here. Fauci attended Regis High School, a private Jesuit school in Manhattan's Upper East Side, where he captained the school's basketball team despite standing only 5'7". What's interesting is when he played basketball, which was when, like the 1940s or something like that. I mean, the guy's in his 80s, right? So he probably played basketball in like the late 40s or early 50s. And small guys had a role in the game. Like Bob Cousy was maybe all of 5'8" or 5'9". He was a small guy. And Bob Cousy was probably one of the most Bob Cousy was a very important player in the history of basketball because Bob Cousy like had flash to his game. Like he did passes that other people didn't do. He was a great dribbler. So you could be small in the NBA or play basketball, right? So the next pivotal player is George Mikan, who becomes this big man who can actually do things. And then that's when you have this rush to play. You get these big guys coming in. You also have to keep in mind that Fauci probably went to an all-white school too, no doubt. And had he played with other players who were non-white, he probably wouldn't even make the team. But that was a long time ago, and he could do stuff like that. So at 5'7", what did he grow an inch since then? Okay, who else do we have? Wendy Eater, hello, Wendy. Good to see you. Dave Sullivan, hello, Dave. Anybody else? April Himmel's here. Windhammer. Kevin Stick Evers, what's going on, brother? Good to see you. Hope all's well down there in Florida. TFT, the tinfoil tiara, is here. Is Jasper crying? Jasper has these moments. He has existential moments. The small hats are following the clergy plan for the complete obliteration of European people. Yep, that's exactly. Kudnov clergy plan. If you haven't seen it, heard about it, read about it, I urge you to look into it. And you read it and you look at what's going on, you proved me that I'm wrong. You can't. You can't do that. The receipts are in for that. I'd love to go to Paris someday. Paris, read it. Who said that? Gigi. It's overrated. No, I like Paris. I've had good times in Paris, but I've had better times in other parts of France. I've had better times in other parts of France. But, you know, it was one of the great cities of the world. And now it's, unfortunately, the great cities of the world are being turned into not so great places. Let's see, who else we have? Rita Perea showing up. Sherry, what's going on, Sherry? Good to see you. Stan Mick in the house. Boy, we got a good crew today. Debisu is here. I think I've reached the end of the scroll. Did I miss anybody? There's Frank Bry. And Bell Bling by Debbie Vlog. Cryptic Thinker. I got everybody. Oh, there she is. The one and only Astrology with Heather. What's going on, Heather? Looking forward to jamming with you this week. And I actually just mentioned you and talked about the nodes. So, yeah, we're going to get into that. All right, let's do a little invocation. Sounded a little French there. And then maybe Jasper will come. If you kind of envision Jasper, maybe you guys can summon Jasper. Maybe he'll make an appearance. All right, here we go. All right, dear blessed and holy Mother, Father God, of the great central sun, within the universal light, which is the light of Yeshua, Sananda, Emmanuel, we ask that only the highest and best information, wisdom, and truth comes through this channel. At this time, that means you. And in so doing, we affirm and decree the qualities of clarity and coherence, commitment, comprehension, character, courage, creativity, humor, flexibility, compassion, and above all, love. We ask that any karmic residue be cleansed, purified, clarified, removed from the stream at this time, and so be it. Let's go. All right. So why don't we take a look at the chart of the moment? Then we're gonna segue into Mars and Virgo. I even made a graphic tonight for Mars and Virgo. I did a little pre-production planning. So Mars and Virgo, and then we're going to get into Simone Biles' chart. Very interesting chart, especially based on what she went through in Japan. And guess what else I did? I relocated her chart for Tokyo. So we're going to look at her relocated chart in Tokyo. And I also decided to look at the chart of the CDC. So we're going to look at the CDC's chart and where they're at and where they're at with their progress chart. So we'll look at the CDC's natal chart, its transits, and the CDC progress chart. So we got a very heavy Mars and Virgo show here. In fact, Simone Biles also has Mars and Virgo. So we got a theme. We got a theme happening. All right, so why don't we check out where we are now astrologically. Oh, by the way, big shout out to my old man, wherever you are in this universe, this omniverse that we're living in, wherever you are, a happy birthday. Today was his birthday, August 1st, 1935. Today's the day, and I managed to get together with my kid today, which was really cool. We had a good visit. All right. So let's just do a little Austin here. All right. One of these days, I'm gonna get the karaoke music, because they don't sing, they have the words. I'm gonna get the karaoke music to Heat of the Moment, and then I'm gonna make up lyrics for Chart of the Moment, and I'm gonna have a Chart of the Moment song based on the Heat of the Moment. I'm gonna do that. And by the way, my singing voice sucks. I'm tone deaf, so you guys are gonna have a lot of fun with that. It was the Chart of the Moment. All right, here we go. Did I ever tell you guys this story? It's one of these heartbreaking stories when I was a kid. So I was really into the group, The Fifth Dimension. I loved that group as a kid. I loved that. And of course, when I was 10 years old, I was 9 years old. The big hit was Age of Aquarius and Let the Sun Shine. So I moved from my town in California, San Jose. I was fourth grade. And I moved like right around, when was that, like late October, I think. It might have been around late October. Middle of late October. The World Series had happened, so it was probably middle, late October. So I go to this new school, and I just started this new school. And it was like my second day. And I've told this story before, some of you guys know the story. And my entire grade are singing, like at the school, whatever, assembly, right? School assembly. And they're singing. Age of Aquarius and Let the Sun Shine. And I just got there, right, to the school. And this woman, I guess she was the choir director or something. And she said, "Let me hear you sing." So they're already in there. They're already in the auditorium. They're already on stage. And she was fucking auditioning me. And it wasn't like there were like 4 or 5 kids or, everybody was fucking singing, right? Well, let me hear you sing. Of course, I can't sing. And she said, "Well, why don't you just wait out here?" I swear to God. And I'm standing there. I'm like, what the fuck, Like, I can't even go in and watch them sing. That was an interesting moment in time. Very interesting moment in time. Anyway, it was like, if I needed any more validation, I got it one more time when I tried out for choir. I think back in the 6th grade. And I'm like, sorry, you don't qualify. All right, here we go. Let's see. Yep, there's Mars. Just moved into Aquarius. Virgo. And of course, my brain. Venus and Virgo, just out ahead of Mars. We've got this really tight conjunction with Sun Mercury. Mercury ahead of the Sun in Leo. This is an interesting kind of start of the week, right? Because you're starting with a Sun-Saturn opposition right out of the gate. You got Mercury in the mix, and then you've got the wild card Uranus. I'm telling you, people are going to say things this week that are going to change the course of their lives. Okay, this is going to happen. Now, you may not read about it in the headlines, or you may read something where somebody says something and they put their foot in their mouth and it's like, you're canceled. You're canceled. And that's where it's going to start. That's where this week is going to begin. We're looking at Monday and it's like, bam. and Sun Mercury haven't even moved into like the tight confines of that square with Uranus. It's approaching. It's approaching. So here's how this, to me, this is how this T-square works. Right now, there's all this pressure, right? We got Saturn and Aquarius, and we got them on their heels, by the way, a little bit. I think we have them on their heels a little bit. When I say they, we're talking about the what I call the low priests of science, right? The low priests of science, the Pharisees of fallacies. You know, we've got them on the run a little bit because now they're saying, they being, of course, Rochelle Walensky, who is the head of the CDC. Now, born, by the way, born January 20th. January 20th. So she's right there. Rochelle Walensky is like right there at the beginning of that, the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, the great conjunction happening right around her sun. So for better or worse, this woman is a key player. I'm not a fan, but she's a key player. Anyway, she said, well, we're not going to mandate the vaccine. We're not going to do that. We're not going to mandate the carjack. She said that. Okay. What we're going to do is we're going to turn it over to states, and we're going to turn it over to cities and counties and private entities, which is what they've been doing all along. It's nothing new. And I don't think they can. I don't think they can do it. And I actually talked about this on Twitter because on March 13th of 2020, Trump had an executive order which basically declared an emergency. And what he did essentially was he decoupled the federal response from the state or local response. And at that point, FEMA was in charge. And FEMA may still be in charge, by the way, because that executive order has not been rescinded. It was only supposed to last 6 months. It was up for review in when? September 13th. I think 12th or 13th. I think it might have been the 12th. But it was up for review, and they could have ended it in September, which, again, theoretically, I would have, but they didn't, because that allowed them to run the EUA, which is the emergency authorization. Okay. It allowed them to do that. It started on March 13th. It got the emergency authorization in place. Like, we would not have had the carjacks without Trump declaring that emergency. It just wouldn't have happened. But he did. And so they fast-tracked, the carjack. And in September, they could have said, okay, we're done. But they couldn't, because they needed to keep rolling things out, right? So it's like, okay, we're going to table this for now. And we're just going to keep moving forward. Well, Biden hasn't changed any of that. Like, that's still on, right? We're still under that original executive order. Like, Biden changed all these other executive orders, not that one. Of course not. Now, in order for this, and this is the thing that people have to understand, in order for the federal government to have a nationwide mandate so that everybody would get a vaccine, they would have to rescind that executive order. They would have to rescind that. And if they rescinded that executive order, they would not be able to continue the program that they initiated and that everybody, well, not everybody, but a lot of people have unfortunately engaged with. Okay. So this is really important to understand. Now, they can flip the script and they can get the FDA to approve these experimental carjacks. But from what I understand, and I've done a fair amount of research with people that are pretty connected to that world and that system, although outside of it now. I think Malone is one of them and a few others. And they asked them, do you think that the FDA would ever approve this? And this one guy said, not a chance in hell. Not a chance in hell. And the reason why, here's the reason why. And I think that there's some truth to that. And here's the reason why, because the FDA has to have some level of credibility. Okay. Now you may think, well, no, they do have to have some level of credibility because they have to be able to do things moving forward, whatever those things are, whether they're positive or negative, whether it's like, it's time to stop eating cows and start eating bugs, right? That could be something that comes out of the FDA's mouth. And so they need to have some kind of credibility, positively or negatively, in order for them to continue to run their program. But if their credibility would be torpedoed by the approval of something that ultimately has been shown to be deleterious, they're screwed. They're totally screwed. They'll never, ever, ever be able to do anything again as an agency. So there may be some truth to that. There may be some truth that they will not be able to get these things approved. And if they do get approved, I think we're in a very different territory. A very, very different territory, which means that the timeline is being sped up rapidly. Like at that point, they're willing to just burn the FDA. They don't care at that point. They're just going to burn it. Okay, we're going to burn this. We're going to burn this group because they no longer have any credibility. And so when they do that, then they're really pushing hard into endgame because they're not counting on them to be able to be this quote unquote authority, so that they can, move forward with other kinds of approvals, right? So if that happens, then everything's accelerating very quickly. I don't think it will. I think they're going to try to play this thing out all the way through 2022. That's my sense, okay? Because if they were going, again, they cannot federally mandate this because they have to get rid of that executive order. And if they get rid of that executive order, the emergency status ends. And now all these applications for the emergency status can no longer be used because it's no longer an emergency. And the only way that they can change that is to have the approval. And again, I don't think they're going to do it. But if they do it, then we're in endgame because the FDA will be completely at risk for having zero credibility from that moving forward. Okay. So, but we're still seeing the Saturn opposition, but you can see now Saturn's retrograding. Saturn is retrograding, and it feels like they're kind of, I wouldn't say they're backing off, but they're kind of moving in a different direction. At least for now. At least for now. And I want to share something with you on a personal level. And a bit of a retreat, by the way. But I want to share something with you on a personal level. So a lot of you know I live in a small town in Texas. And I guess it was late January, early February. They decided they were going to put a tracking tool on the city website, which meant that if you were somebody who felt like either a shop owner or somebody who was like a customer or something like that, were in violation of any of the COVID restrictions, that they had an anonymous reporting tool on the city website. And people like flipped out. And, we all showed up, not we all, but a lot of us showed up at a city council meeting. And man, the city council got an earful. And the city manager got an earful, and the mayor got an earful. And guess what they did? They took it down. But then they had a number that you could call, right? It was like, well, we're going to turn it into a phone system. And then we got on them for that. And then that went away. So that was gone. So it was like, hey, one for the home team, right? And then we were adamant that we wanted to meet in public again, although meeting in private on Zoom was a very interesting thing. because now we got to stream those meetings to Facebook, and people were catching wind of what went on at these city council meetings, and they're like, whoa, there's some very impassioned people there, and the city council is like, they're kind of on the wrong side of this issue. Not everybody felt that way, obviously, but a lot of people did. It was like, so it was kind of an interesting moment. Then they moved the meetings back into being in public again, and that's something that we demanded. And initially, it was really hard to get into these meetings with the Zoom stuff. It was almost like they were purposefully shutting you out. So we got them to change that because we were turning up the volume. And then we showed up at a school board meeting where they were going to talk about, the mask mandate in the school. And there were a lot of people at that meeting, and we turned up the volume again. And guess what? They removed the mask mandate. So the moral of this story is that the squeaky wheel does get some grease here. It does get some grease. And it especially gets some grease when there's more than just one or two or three people. When politicians and petty tyrants feel the heat, they can bubble pretty quickly because they're invested. I mean, only the most stubborn and fixed in this group, they can bubble pretty quickly because they're invested in being reelected. I mean, really, that's what they want. They want to be reelected. And that's why Greg Abbott is sort of doing all the things he should have been doing a year ago, even though he's not doing them the way that I think he should be doing, but that's another story. Anyway, so this is happening now. The volume's getting turned up. And we're seeing Saturn retrograde here. So they're kind of retreating, even though they're trying to push things and move forward with things. And I think that I think it's really problematic because Saturn's also corporations. And Saturn is like the CEO, the boss. It's all top down. So whether it's Washington, D.C. or New York or Joliet, Illinois, or wherever a company is located, or Silicon Valley, I think they're going to have problems. They're going to have problems. I mean, even with something like the postal system and the Postal Workers Union, they're like, no, we're not going to do this. We are not going. That's a little Gemini there, by the way. True note in Gemini playing trickster, right? A little Hermes action. They're just like, no, we're not going to do this. And it's a big, big union inside of the government. And it's like, okay, well, gee, these people are pretty important. They actually move a lot of product here. What are we going to do about that, right? Pretty significant, actually. So I think what we're going to see here is we're going to see this retreat, right? With Saturn in retrograde, we're going to see this retreat and this repositioning. And then reposition is a really important word because we're in a war, okay? We're in a war. It's the way it is. It's a war of ideas or a war, or a war of principles or energetic war or spiritual war. You can check all those boxes. So when you're in a war, right, you have to assume like war, kind of warlike and battle tactics. So if there's a group and they're making a very spirited charge on your side, then what do? Well, you retreat and you try to, get to higher ground and regroup and figure out what your next moves are going to be, because you don't want to meet this group head on. If you meet them head on, there's probably a pretty good chance with their momentum and their anger, right? That, the savagery and the anger and all the stuff that they're channeling, you might get your ass kicked. And by the way, in a fight, I would say almost 8 times out of 10, the angry person always wins. 8 times out of 10. Every now and then, you get somebody who can weather that first burst of anger. And if they can weather that first burst of anger, like that other person is spent. Remember that if you're ever in a confrontation with somebody, right, physical confrontation, if you can just weather that first kind of, assault or that first kind of, volley or whatever, right? If you can weather that, there's a pretty good chance that person just is, you fired their charge, and then you can really like move in on them, right? What happens is that the angry person has enough like intensity and energy to like do damage, shock, and just completely freak somebody out, right? It's the anger and the initial kind of like intensity. If you can get through that, you can beat them, right? So this is what's going on here, and we have this Sun Mercury conjunction, and man, it's in opposition here, but it hasn't really reached this square with Uranus. That's going to be interesting. And with Mercury, with the Sun, we're looking at 4 days from now. So that would put us on roughly Thursday. And then Mercury would be, what about 6 days from now, I think. That's a tricky time. And I've heard some stuff about this coming weekend, like with things going haywire, maybe the grid goes down, something. I've seen some prognostications, and not even astrological, by the way, about this coming weekend. And that's when, right around, we should be able to see something on roughly Thursday. So it looks like Heather and I are going to have something to talk about. We should see something on Thursday with that Sun-Uranus square. And then Mercury move. This is a big time. This T-square is pretty significant and we haven't even got into Mars, which we will. We're going to get into Mars in a minute here. Let's see. We have Neptune at 22, so we're going to get into the Mars-Neptune opposition that's coming. We've got the Moon at 26 Taurus, so tomorrow, by the end of the day, the Moon will be in Gemini. It'll be in close conjunction with the true node. That'll be interesting. That'll definitely be interesting. I think people are going to have the opportunity to be kind of schizophrenic with their emotions. No, I mean, Moon and Gemini, people have Moon and Gemini need to talk about their emotions, right? That's how that works. They need to talk things through and talk, either one side or the other. It's a very kind of, communicative placement for the Moon. It's a little, I would say it's functionally schizophrenic. I mean, I think we're all kind of functionally schizophrenic, by the way, but the Moon in Gemini is kind of more of that, because you're dealing with these ideas of being partitioned. We got a nice trine with Pluto right now. That's great. It's going to move out of that trine, but that's that's been going on all weekend. Really good time to deal with, again, resources. And I mowed the lawn yesterday. That's a really good Moon and Taurus thing to do. A big fucking lawn here. But the Moon true node conjunction, that's I think it's a way for people, and an opportunity for people to step out of their emotional body and really look at how they feel about things in a more dispassionate kind of way. I think it's a really good opportunity to do that. It doesn't matter if you're in this chat room and you're into astrology or not. I mean, if you're not into astrology, it would just be a really good thing to do, right? To kind of figure out sort of how you can look at the other side or feel about the other side without being attached to it. Because that's the one thing about Gemini that's really interesting, is it's not attached. All the air signs, I think Libra may be the most attached of the air signs in some ways, but Gemini is not that attached. It's like, okay, well, that's interesting. But what's over here? I'm done with that. I'll try this. And, that's how Gemini works. And it can have some other kinds of things that it works out, but that's by and large kind of how it operates. Right? It's not, the Moon in Gemini is not attached to an emotional position in a lot of ways. Because when we get into Gemini, there's always this other side, which is kind of observe of what's happening. My internet connection is unstable. Don't know why. Anyway, but this right here, boom, this T-square, it's worth paying attention to, for sure. And Thursday, Friday, the weekend, could be volatile. Could be volatile. And we've seen a lot of volatile weather. Earth change stuff definitely happening. There's stuff going on in Yellowstone. We talked about the incidences of volcanoes. I think we had like 60 active volcanoes worldwide about a year ago. No, not a year ago. About 2 months ago, and now it's up to like over 80. You're dealing with sun cycles with the sun in Leo. You're dealing with things like with Uranus and Taurus, Chiron resonance. There's a lot going on here with this T-square that is kind of even beyond astrology. And it gets into geology, cosmology. There's a lot happening here. And clearly, I think this week is going to be a pretty intense and potentially very pivotal week. And that's in anticipation of this Mars inverter. And I do like the fact that with the moon in Gemini early in the week in the conjunction with the true node, that people can kind of observe things on an emotional level that they're not attached to. So keep that in mind. Oh, let's see what we got. Venus is starting to move into opposition with Neptune. And that's going to become sort of more in play over the coming days. And when you get in Venus-Neptune oppositions, you wind up dealing with disillusionment in relationships. You know, usually that's what happens. Venus and Virgo is really critical, and I think it's one of the harder places for Venus actually, because it can be really critical, and there's a lot of perfectionism with Venus and Virgo in general. So if you have Venus and Virgo in your chart, it's not always easy because the standards can be really, really high in terms of bonding with people, relating with people. That said, if you have other aspects with Venus, it can change that a little bit. But you always have something to learn with these things, right? No matter if they're, detriment or if they're exalted or whatever. But the other thing too is again, because we're kind of moving towards the transpersonal, right? Like Virgo is really kind of the last stop, because when we get into Libra, we get into this kind of interzone, between like the first 6 signs, which are very personal. You move into Libra, and then you're kind of dealing with the other, right? You have to think about other people and relationships and contracts and your word and all those things, right? And it's this kind of gateway to like the upper part of the chart with Scorpio through Pisces. So this is kind of the last station for the personal stuff. And then we're kind of working things out here and negotiating and having to engage with other people. So, this has a lot to do with, I think, our relationship with health, right? Because that's what Venus represents, is relationship, and Virgo is all about health. And here we have this Neptune opposition coming into play. And people I think are going to have a real hard look at their relationship with things like healthcare providers and hospitals and medicine, right? And it's because it's critical. I mean, this Venus and Virgo is kind of critical. And with Neptune coming in, I mean, we can get all kinds of influence, illusion, delusion, propaganda, a lot of fear. And I would say Virgo is a sign that is predominantly a sign that is dealing with fear. Of all the signs, I think Virgo and Pisces, but more Virgo in some ways, is dealing with fear. Because when you look at the opposite sign, it's Pisces. And what does Pisces represent? It represents all the things that Virgo cannot control. It represents this miasma of, possibility, anything. You can get sick, anything go wrong, right? There's this kind of like primordial chaos with Pisces. So Virgo as a sign wants to keep that at bay and limit the potential for that to influence its life. That's how Virgo works. That's how the opposition works. Pisces is different. Pisces has to deal with Virgo. It's not really about fear in some ways. It doesn't have the same kind of, neurotic or hypochondriacal relationship that I think Virgo can have sometimes with health. It's different. It's very different. And maybe Pisces' fear is about control, and their fear is about being regimented and turned into something that is mundane or but it's a different relationship, and I don't think it's governed by the same thing. I don't think Pisces is governed by fear in that way. I think if anything, Pisces might be governed by guilt versus fear. That's my sense. That maybe that Pisces isn't doing enough, right? Or maybe they're not grounded enough, or making. But by and large, most Pisces have their own. They're just, they're just floating down. They're a leaf on the river of life. That's Pisces, really, in a lot of ways. But Virgo has to deal with the Piscean primordial chaos. So here we have this Neptune coming in, and I think it could be very problematic. And I think it would be a lot of propaganda about people's relationship with their health. I think it's going to be kind of intense, actually. Pretty intense. And then we got Mars coming into play. So there you go. There's your chart of the moment. Why don't we make a shift here? Let's talk about Mars. I have my Mars graphic. Women of the 50s. Oh, come on. I don't need this right now. I need this. Here we go. All right, where's that Mars graphic? Here it is, right here. Boom. All right. Let's check this out. I don't want that. Here we go. All right. Mars in Virgo, 7:30 to 9:15. That's how long this Mars transit is going to last. So we've got some key dates and transits. The first key date here is going to be on the 19th of August. And that's when Mars is going to be in conjunction with Mercury at 12 degrees. Wow. That is nervy. It is edgy. And we see some very interesting aspects here. So we're a bit of a grand trine, right? So the moon's going to be in Capricorn, and Uranus is in Taurus, and the moon, of course, briefly will be in that orb where we'll have a grand trine between the moon, Mercury, Mars, and Uranus, and all in Earth signs. Okay, so that's a very interesting time, because on the one hand, on a plus side, to me, that's an energy that can move mountains. Moon in Capricorn is very dispassionate, very, very dispassionate, cool, detached, kind of looking at, well, what's kind of in this for me? That's Moon in Capricorn's kind of like that. Like, if I'm going to invest emotionally, what am I going to get out of it? How do I improve my position? with Moon in Capricorn. That's once you get over, if you have Moon in Capricorn, it's once you kind of get over your relationship with your either stiff or judgmental mother or family. People have Moon in Capricorn have to grow up very quickly and have high standards that they have to abide by. It's not an easy moon, but as they get older, it gets easier. That's the whole beauty of Capricorn. So we have this Moon in Capricorn, trining Uranus and Taurus. That means that emotionally, there's more potential for creativity, right? It's gonna bring like another kind of energy to this kind of at times stiff and very formal expression of the moon. And this is happening just before. Is it just before the full moon? We're gonna be a full moon. It's gonna be. I don't think, because we just came out of the full moon in Aquarius. I'd have to go back and check. But it's just because on the 22nd, the 23rd, which is 4 days later. So we may have another full moon in Aquarius. And I don't think it's going to be a blue moon because it's happening in another month, right? Or in a different month. But the moon trine Uranus is interesting because you can have a kind of unique and creative and kind of outsider emotional response. And when you get Mars and Mercury together in that mix, things can happen very quickly. Like that's a very interesting date, just in terms of energy in general, but in terms of where we are with this narrative, this global narrative that we're in, this is a very interesting date, this 8/19 day. And, you know, I see this Mars and Virgo. Let's just go down. I'm going to go back to some of these dates. You know, Mars and Virgo, nervous, meticulous, neurotic, health warrior, productive, perfectionism, demanding, super conscious body image, right? You're going to get all that with Mars and Virgo. All of it. And so that's what we're working out here. It's a nervous energy. It is meticulous on like the border of, I don't know, neurotic, I guess. It's kind of a neurotic energy. You know, it's kind of neurotic because, you know, Mars and Virgo is fast. It's always moving. It's you know, it's like Mars and Gemini. It's working. It's always staying in motion, right? But unlike Mars and Gemini, Mars and Virgo needs to have a solution. Mars and Virgo needs to find an answer to a problem. That's what Virgo is all about. It's what differentiates it from Gemini. Gemini can sit down and, you know, divide and hash things up and turn things into their fractal relationships, and quite often don't really need to do anything with it, right? You don't really need to do anything with it. They can, but it's more the act of like breaking things apart and looking at them and go, oh, that's interesting, right? And maybe they'll do something with them. That's not what Virgo does. Virgo needs to do something with it, right? Virgo will do those things to solve a problem, to have a solution, right? To have some kind of fix that addresses the chaos, which is Pisces on the back end. So when you get Mars in Virgo, well, first of all, you know, there's a lot of heavy work energy, a lot of service energy involved with Mars and Virgo, because Virgo rules the service-oriented field, right? And we're dealing with this weird transition between people working and not working, AI, robotics, all that stuff. And some of that will come up with Mars and Virgo, but I see this more in terms of where we are and in terms of this, you know, the health warrior, right? I mean, the health warrior, people are like, hey, you know, hey, look, we have got to mobilize here for our health. In this 8/19 day, 8/19, 8/18, 8/19, 8/20, that's a key day. Those are key days right there. Very key days. And I don't know how it's going to manifest, but I would assume that it would be global, right? Because when you talk about Capricorn, Capricorn is a sign that does kind of move into that global discussion, you know, with corporations. Uranus clearly is a planet connected to global impact, right? Because it's the rule of Aquarius. We're kind of stumbling into this Aquarian age. You know, it is a collective energy. It's really, really interesting. Very, very interesting. And also, it's from a more personal level, or at least to try to personify this, you know, I could see Moon in Capricorn also relating to like older women or elders, and you know, and in this instance a positive way, you know, sort of like you know, older women that are healers, or older women that are, you know, the good witches, right, with this Moon in Capricorn, and again, you know, kind of having an impact, you know, on sort of the social theater. So I could kind of see that there too. It's a very interesting transit. Then we got Mars. This is the biggie right here. Mars opposed Neptune, 22 degrees. 22 degrees on 9/3. That is a huge transit. A huge transit. That could go any way. Right? You could have this Neptunian energy really creating like a movie, right? A false front, something that appears to be one thing, because we know that cinema is ruled by Pisces, right? Cinema is ruled by Pisces and Neptune. So it could be like a total movie in opposition to this Mars and Virgo, where you have this very mobilized kind of like very catalytic initiatory period here on the 19th, 18th and 19th. And then this Neptune opposition comes in to, you know, throw water on it, right? It's going to throw water on this thing. You know, it doesn't matter if Mars is in Virgo or Cancer or Pisces or Scorpio or Libra. Mars is a planet associated with fire. And when you get Neptune in opposition with it, what is it? It's like dousing the fire. It's like putting out the flame. So that's a very, very important time, because there could be something on a collective level, which would be like, see, look what's happening here. And now we're dealing with another distraction, or we're dealing with another discussion or another narrative. And it could be something, you know, geological, like an earthquake, a tsunami, some kind of a disaster. I mean, we could, you know, like look what happened in Germany. They had this huge flooding, and all this quote unquote, you know, these medical mandates. It just got pushed aside. We got something bigger to deal with here. You know, we'll return to this. We'll get back to your regularly scheduled programming after we're done with this, right? That's what's going on, and that could happen here. But it could also be an event that looks very doomy, right? Which anything that is connected to any kind of momentum that starts around the 18th and 19th, you could douse that, right? On the other hand, because we're dealing with this opposition, on the other hand, you know, you could have this Mars and Virgo energy, which has had enough. Like we've just had enough. We've had enough of this kind of Neptunian cloud, this Neptunian fog. You know, 2 weeks to stop the spread, and 2 years later, here we are. You know, we're still in this thing, right? And Mars and Virgo could cut through it in a lot of ways. And then we have the new moon, which comes in right after that on the 8th. And Mars is going to be conjuncting the new moon in Virgo, which really begins to set us up, right? That's at 25 degrees. And that sets us up for the last, you know, Mars transit through like the outlying territory of the inner planets in the inner signs. And then Mars literally disappears behind the sun. We won't, because you can see Mars now, but you won't see it. You won't see it after the middle of October. And then next year, we're dealing with Mars through all the outer planets, which is going to be interesting. So it's the sort of the part 2 of the Mars transit story of 2021. So, and it sets us up with Mars and Libra, which is, again, really socially active, not happy. I mean, Mars and Libra needs a cause. It needs a cause. It's there to express itself and balance fairness and liberty and personal rights and, you know, personal, to some extent, personal freedoms, more like personal rights. So this Mars transit through Virgo and Libra is going to be huge. really huge. And in Libra, Mars will wind up being in trine with Jupiter and in trine with Saturn. It's a very interesting period of time. Super, super interesting. It's going to go through a square with Pluto, right? It's going to be big. That Mars Libra transit is big, but this one is important because this one is where people begin to get very engaged and very active and very catalyzed around the idea of health. And the big the big transit here is this Neptune opposition. So we can see that coming right around the 1st of September, 2nd of September, right? It goes exact on the 3rd of September. That to me is the drama that gets played out. And then we have this new moon conjunct Virgo, and that can go in a lot of different ways too. It could renew people in their vigor to have an emotional connection with their health, right? And I feel like we're in this place now where too many people have crossed this Rubicon. That's my sense. Too many people have crossed this Rubicon. So as long as Saturn is retrograde in Aquarius, which it will be until October 6th, we're going to, I think, see a lot of these kind of oligarchic, corporatized Saturnian structures move into retreat. It'll be very interesting because in October, that's when we have Mars in Libra. That's when Saturn goes direct. It's going to be a very, very interesting time. So I'm sure Heather and I will cover some of this as well. All right. Speaking of Mars, let's look at the chart of Simone Biles. And I thought it was Biles, but it's Bales. I've heard it pronounced as Biles. It's Bales. So I have a kind of an incorrect spelling here, which would I fix it? I don't know. So, where are we? Right here. Okay. So apparently, Astro.com has a C rating for her for the time, which isn't bad, by the way. It's not a bad, because when you go to Astro.com, if the rating for the time is an A, like that's a slam dunk. You can use that. B is not really bad. B is pretty good. Usually what you get is an A or a C, or you'll get like kind of an F or an X. So C is not bad. And what's interesting, I don't know how, maybe they rectified this. I don't know. It's not bad. But we know that she was, had a very rough upbringing, raised by her grandparents. But there's a time here. So it's at 12:30 a.m. for the time of birth, which gives her a Sagittarius rising with Pluto on the ascendant. So she's a Pluto and Sag kid. And theoretically, like this is what her chart looks like. Right there. And who knows, maybe somebody kind of, I'd have to go back and check, but this is the time that they were using on Astro.com. So she's a Pisces right here. And she has Sun in Pisces, Mercury in Pisces. Make this a little bit bigger for you to see, for me to see too. So she has Sun in Pisces, Venus in Pisces, Mercury in Pisces. Not uncommon. In a chart, you'll see Sun, Mercury close to each other, Sun, Venus generally close to each other. So that's pretty normal. Got a 3-degree orb between Mercury and the Sun. A little tight, a little close. When it gets really close in those orbs, sometimes it can be difficult working out the conjunction. So there can be some confusion there. And I think there was some confusion there with Simone Biles. We'll talk about that. Venus-Sun conjunction 5 degrees. I think it's great in a lot of ways. And I'm going to break her chart down into kind of like quadrants here. So the first quadrant that I'm going to look at is this quadrant, starting with Saturn. So she's got Saturn in Aries. That's a hard placement. In general, I think it's hard for women, but it's a hard placement in general. So she has Saturn in Aries. And best case scenario with Saturn in Aries is you can be really, really disciplined. And you can kind of master the body with Saturn in Aries. There you go. Good. That's a good kind of way for her to work with Saturn, because she became this, incredible gymnast, right? Discipline, perfection of performance, which Aries can be engaged with, right? Without having to think a lot. When you think with Aries, then you're in trouble. We're going to talk about that. And then she's got this, trine with Pluto, which is great, right? Saturn, Pluto trine, impacting popular culture through Pluto in Sagittarius. It's retrograde. It's Pluto retrograde. And to me, this is where she gets into trouble with Japan, because Sagittarius represents foreign countries. So theoretically, she would be better at what she does closer to home. She's got Moon in Gemini, which tends to be more local. At the very least, her state, or her region, and even her country, her home country, because here's Pluto on the other side. She's got this Pluto Moon opposition, and that's a very intense opposition, right? Very, very intense. And we just talked about Moon in Gemini. She's got Moon in Gemini, and she has this in conjunct with Chiron, and that's Chiron at 1 Scorpio. So what's interesting is that the discussion has been about mental health with her. I would say that for Simone Biles, the discussion should be about emotional health. And I know that it's easy to have like a discussion about mental health with Moon in Gemini, because I just talked about how Moon in Gemini has to talk about how they feel, right? But with the in conjunct with Chiron, which is in Scorpio, and dealing with compulsions, right? I think Chiron in Scorpio can be very compulsive. To me, Chiron in Scorpio can be, it's kind of along the lines of dealing with a deep psychological wound and having to get to the bottom of that wound in order to clean it out and transform it. And look, her Chiron is at 1 degree, right? In astrology, when you work with Chiron, the Chironic crisis is around the degree of Chiron. So, what are you dealing with here? You're dealing with something that's very pre-verbal, very, very pre-verbal. So her Chiron has a lot to do with her conception and has a lot to do with her birth. It's right there. And it's retrograde, which is kind of like, get me back in the fucking womb, right? That's Chiron in Scorpio, retrograde, moving backwards. So really the key for Simone Biles and her, she wanted to unlock the key, which is Chiron, to her life. She'd want to go through some type of hypnosis or some type of hypnotherapy, so she could actually go back to a pre-verbal time. And she's not going to work this out analytically. She's just not going to work it out analytically. Whatever she went through, and there's a lot of things that we could talk about and discuss. We could talk about the enabling and all the things that made it easier for her to kind of throw in the towel. But there are deeper astrological issues here in her life that are getting played out in a very social kind of way. So she's got this in conjunct with the moon, and she's got Black Moon Lilith right here. Like that's transiting her moon. Wow. So that's at, where is it? Yeah, that's at 1 Gemini. Oh, look who's here. Are you going to join us tonight? Speaking of Black Moon Lilith. Well, come on up here. You got to come up here. Come up here. Right on cue, Black Moon Lilith. Come on. Well, get up here. You can come up here. Come on. We have a Rosie sighting tonight. Here she is. She said, Black Moon Lilith, let me get in on this. Let me get on this shit. Anyway, Black Moon Lilith is approaching her moon. That can be problematic. I mean, now the gymnastic stuff is done, right? It's all done. She didn't do anything. I think the hardest thing for her is going to be coming back home. And I don't think she's going to stay there for the Olympics. I don't think she's going to ride it out. If you were really successful and it was a great Olympics, boy, you'd stay there to the end, right? You'd go out, you'd have fun, the Olympic Village would be rocking, you'd be a star. You wouldn't want to leave. I think the problems for her are really going to happen when she comes back home and that Black Moon Lilith kicks in. Yeah, that's what I think. So let's go back to this quadrant. It all starts off with Saturn, structure, order, discipline, perfecting the body, right? And then here comes that South Node. South Node in Pisces and conjunct Mercury. To me, already, that's problematic. Now, she has an opposition with Mercury and Mars in her chart. And that's on-off, right? That's on-off. It's like Mercury and Pisces will have to go through and process a bunch of stuff, and then Mars will kick in. Right? That's how that thing works. And by the way, she's got a really interesting grand trine. She's got Mars in Libra. What do we have here? We got a trine with, what's that, Rosie? Where's that trine? Trine with Uranus and trine with Neptune, right? Trine with Uranus, trine with Neptune, right there. Boom. I saw Mars in Virgo. My bad. 27, not Libra. I saw Libra up there. So yeah. So Mars trine Uranus, Mars trine Neptune. She's got Uranus in Aquarius, and even with the Moon, mathematically and trine. It's a really interesting grand trine, right? So being able to put emotion like into her action, which is Mars, and can be creative and innovative. With the Uranus trine, with the Neptune trine to Mars, very creative, super creative. But she has now, and I think to some extent, like she has to be right. Like for her to actually do her thing, she's got to be right because she's dealing with this afflicted Mercury, and Mercury is afflicted in Pisces, by the way, and it's conjunct the South Node, and she's here to be kind of more action oriented. More instinctual with Mars, right? Mars is not about thinking. Even if it's in Virgo, it's not really about thinking. It's about, being engaged in physicality. In Virgo, it's very fast. So overthinking and bringing this kind of, Neptunian, mercurial thing into the mix could be terrible for her. Terrible. And she's been going through a personality crisis. She's going through a fucking personality crisis. She's got Neptune conjuncting her sun. The thing with the Neptune sun conjunction is that sometimes you can be just completely like convinced that you're God, right? With a Neptune sun conjunction. It can really go that high. You can feel like, oh, I'm impervious. I'm a divine being. And who knows, maybe you could tap into something like that. But also with the Neptune sun conjunction, it can take you down to the bottom of things because, of course, Neptune's dual. And it can be very hard for people with Neptune sun conjunctions. And especially when you bring this Mars opposition into the mix. Like astrologically, she's fucked up right now. She just is. This kind of gets back into Richard Sherman territory. And it's interesting that nobody's talking about Richard Sherman in mental health. Even though the guy clearly had a massive breakdown, I'm not sure she had And the thing about Pisces, though, it can also can be very related to the path of least resistance. That's the other thing with Pisces, right? Water finds its own level. So if she's getting a lot of like feedback from the press or from her coach or from people that are supporting Naomi Osaka and this whole mental health thing, like Pisces can just go there, right? Say, yeah, fuck, man, I'm going to go into this mental health thing. And I'm just going to, and I'm going to justify why I'm doing this. Well, I have my medals. And, I'm good. You girls go get your medals. And with mutable signs, a lot of that justification can happen. But she starts off with Saturn here, and there she gets into this weird Mercury conjunction with the South Node, right? So there's something about the South Node there she's got to figure out. Like she's got to be able to kind of, move through and muddy through those periods where she can become more Virgo-esque, more Mars. That's the thing here, right? And when she does that, guess what happens? The grand trine kicks in and she's good as gold. Literally and figuratively, she's good as gold. But because Neptune was here, it's harder. It's just harder for her to do that. She's going to go to the path of least resistance, and she's having a personality crisis. And she's got some other stuff going on, right? Chiron conjuncting Saturn. That's hard. That's a hard conjunction because you feel vulnerable. And here's the thing too. And by the way, I'm not necessarily giving her a break because I feel like in a lot of ways she kind of succumbed to the current political climate in theater. And maybe it has to do with her programming and this astrological, just kind of, hey man, I'm just going to go with the flow. And that girl over there is getting some love for sitting out. So I'm just going to do the same thing, whether it's conscious or unconscious. I think that's what's happening here. But the other thing too is that, and she said this, and I think that there's some truth and merit to this. The Olympics were supposed to be last year. And she trained for those Olympics to happen last year. And if you're an athlete, and especially if you have Saturn in Aries and you are into the training and the conditioning and the discipline, and it gets pulled out from under you, like the cycle is weird, right? Now you've got this year, you don't know if the Olympics are going to happen. And if you're a creature of habit, and athletes are really a creature of habit, and your routine gets disrupted, your life gets disrupted, your psyche gets disrupted. And when that happens, you could lose confidence. And I think that she was actually afraid that something could happen to her. I think that it's true with a Chiron Saturn conjunction, Saturn ruling things like the skeletal structure, the spine, Aries is the neck and the head, and Chiron conjuncting her Saturn. I think she was kind of tapped into that. I also think she found the path of least resistance. I also think she's having a fucking personality crisis, right? She's got this Mars-Neptune opposition, which is making her feel less kind of sure of herself. It's like opposing Mars. Can I do this? Can I do this, right? Neptune brings in big doubt. And it's interesting, right? Because what she went through in a lot of ways is what we're going to be going through with this Neptune-Mars opposition. Very interesting, but we're not Pisces, right? The collective is not Piscean, even though Neptune technically is, right? She had Mars kind of around Black Moon Lilith in her chart. She's got Black Moon Lilith in Leo, which has to do with performing. So I have this other theory about Simone Biles and gymnasts in general. I think they're really weird. And Emily and I are going to talk about this week. We're going to mash. I think the whole idea of gymnastics is really weird. And the reason why I think it's weird is because these girls, they start off as these little pixies and their bodies are flexible. And if they fall, they're less prone to injury when they fall because they're young. Your bones are You're just more flexible, softer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And they're not developed. They don't have a lot of, chest or bust, which throws the center of gravity things off. And the promotion of them staying young is, if you're really good, it's part of the sport, right? They want to keep you, 5'2" forever. They want to keep you 5'2" and flat chested forever, so you can maximize your talent for 1, 2, 3 Olympics. And so by the time you get to her age, and she's 24, like, you're ready to, you've kind of moved on in some ways, like at 24, she is not a young girl in the sport. She's just not. And at 24, I mean, theoretically, if you're looking at the cycle of life and everything, she's again, I'm just using theoretical. She should be a mother, right? Mother, married, kids. She's on that path. But there she is. She's 24 years old, competing in a sport where, 16, 17, 18-year-olds, big difference, huge difference, 7-year Saturn cycle difference. And I think she, on some level, also realized that that was not her. Like, she wasn't that pixie anymore. But she doesn't know who she is. She doesn't know who she is. And part of it is this Neptune conjunction with Pisces, with her sun in Pisces. This is a person in crisis. I can tell you that right now. And did she just kind of go with the flow because she knew that she would get some kind of love and support because the track record and the path was already there for her? Absolutely. I think that's what she did. But I also feel like she knew she wasn't right. Her routine was disrupted. So what can we learn from Simone Biles with this whole thing? Honestly, she should never have been there. She should never have been there. But because, again, if this is true, she has Pluto in her ascendant, right? She's going to be, going through this intensity. People have counted on her. She's got Mars in the 10th house, noted for her athletic ability, part of fortune up there, right? People are banking on her. She's got Saturn in Aries, which she's always done. So it's hard in a lot of ways to get out of the routine and out of the pattern. But if I were her, I would not have gone. Period. End of story. Wouldn't have done it. Wouldn't have gone there. Just wouldn't have gone there. She's got Pluto and Sag. We think her ascendant is in Sagittarius, and she has Saturn in Aries. Not a lot of fire. And people that don't have a lot of fire don't often stand up for themselves. They just don't, right? They're not fiery. They don't have that kind of, warrior kind of energy. She's got a lot of air, Jupiter, Uranus. Let's see. Yeah, Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. She's got Saturn, right, sitting on Jupiter. The thing that allowed her to excel in a lot of ways, Jupiter-Uranus is creative, can be really athletic, and she's got Saturn sitting on Jupiter and moving into that conjunction with Uranus, Saturn retrograding. Yeah, I just don't think this was a good thing for her to go, period. End of story. Ideally, when Saturn was conjuncting Neptune in her chart, it'd be really interesting. Like, I would like to interview her or have somebody ask the question, like, where was her head at in like December of 2020? Because when Saturn was on Neptune in her chart, that would have been a really great moment for her to have a kind of that come to Jesus kind of moment and deal with these kind of Neptunian things like expectations and projection and all that. And she could have come to a decision then, I think, which would have been far better, and she would have avoided all this. But I don't think she can in a lot of ways. And I think a lot of it has to do with this Chiron in Scorpio, right? And ultimately, maybe what this is all about is getting to that. getting to that deep, 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 very deep wound, connected to just even being born, right? Okay. Now, what I also did is I relocated her chart, and I did it for, where is it? Okay, I did it for Tokyo to see kind of what was going on for her in Tokyo. See how different it is. It's pretty different. So in Tokyo, midheaven in Taurus, moon in the 10th house. So again, like all her emotional baggage was on display for people to see. 10th house moon in Gemini. And what's really interesting here is all of her Piscean planets showing up in the 8th house. That's not good. That is not a good placement for somebody who needs to be on stage or out in the public. And I've seen people who have 9th house suns and they relocate and their suns go into the 8th house and they disappear, right? They disappear. They're not the same people. They're dealing a lot more with internal psychological issues. And they have to like break through them with that relocation. This put her in a very different place, because remember, those planets, like let's see, we had Sun, we were all over here, right? And they were all in like the 5th house. 5th house, which is, you know, activity. 5th house is Leo, you're on stage, you know, right there, boom. And here in the 8th house, she's hidden. She's totally hidden. And Mars goes into the 2nd house, which brings up a lot of, I think you're going to bring up insecurity, especially if you have this Neptune opposition right there. And then, you know, all those planets that she normally has in the 3rd house, they're in the 6th house where it's related to health. And I mean, this was not a good location for her Olympics wise, period, end of story. It's just not a good place for her. Yeah, Leo on the ascendant, she's getting attention, but she's getting the wrong kind of attention. Wrong kind of attention. It's a turning point in her life. Major turning point in her life. Major. And when she gets back home and that Black Moon Lilith hits her natal moon, I wouldn't say she should be on suicide watch, but I think she's going to be like really sensitive. And Neptune and Pisces is a sensitive sign. Isn't that right? Are you a Pisces? I think she's a Pisces. I think she's an Aries. Are you an Aries? What's your sign? It's thunder and lightning out here right now. All right, there you go. Simone Biles. I was going to go do the chart for the CDC, but I don't think I'm going to do that. I'll save it for next week. I have content for next week. Well, with Mars moving to Virgo, we'll have a lot to talk about. Whatever's happening. Well, next week. I may have a show next week. All right, let's look at this CDC chart real quick. Oh, I didn't want that. All right, hold on. All right. Okay, let me go back here. Let me do the CDC, because I did a bit of an error. Okay. All right. right. So let's look at the natal chart of the CDC. Okay, there it is, natal chart of the CDC. So the CDC got its start on July 1st, 1946. I'm just going to go with 8 in the morning. Atlanta, Georgia. It was named something else previously. So this is the incarnation of the previous version of the CDC. Get out of here. The CDC was originally called, let's see, it was originally called the U.S. Okay, power now. Yeah, we got a lightning storm here and power now briefly, which means that I probably have to wrap this up because if the power goes out, I gotta have a few things taken care of here. Let's just do the CDC chart really quickly. Since I'm in this mode. Oh, that's a progress chart. Hold on. Yeah, the power went out. That's why I froze. Yeah. Right there. So it's interesting, the CDC has Mars and Virgo. Isn't that interesting? So there's a theme here. We got Mars and Virgo, Simone Biles, Mars and Virgo, and the CDC natally has Mars and Virgo. And it kind of makes sense. It's actually a pretty good day to start a chart. Although there's a sun-moon square here, so you can't trust them. By the way, they were founded by the Rockefeller Foundation. If you don't know that, they were funded and founded by the Rockefeller Foundation, governmental agency funded and founded by the Rockefeller Foundation. Of course it was. And that was back in the day when the Rockefellers were really interested in controlling medicine. The whole idea behind the CDC, like it got its start because they wanted an agency that dealt with malaria, and apparently malaria was an issue in the South, and that's why the CDC is in Atlanta, because they had malaria-like conditions in the South. So that's how the CDC started off. It started off with dealing with malaria, and it got money from the Rockefellers, and it mushroomed, became something else. First official day here, Sun in Cancer, right? Squaring Jupiter and squaring Neptune. Which means that their stated goal and intention is not real trustworthy. Sorry to say, that's how it works, right? Jupiter is going to expand the potential for overreach with the sun, and Neptune is going to be duplicitous and be more engaged in enabling and potentially even victimization, right? And masquerading as something that theoretically is about care and about, you gotta go, about care and about nurturing and all those cancerian things. Fake, right? Fake. True node conjunct Uranus in Gemini. Again, kind of, I got this little mothy thing. Again, the intention here is all about science, weird science. We talked about Gemini, how Gemini is not, it's not really, plays devil's advocate. It's always kind of looking at things in a very detached and scientific way. And there you go. This is their kind of stated aim, right? And with this true node transit, the CDC has really become like it's gone through its nodal return, and it's basically fucking run the country. Why don't you catch that moth? Saturn in Cancer, again, how nurturing is that? It's like not real nurturing. It's sort of like, Nurse fucking Cratchit, Saturn in Cancer. Squaring, what do we have? We got a square to Jupiter, which may be helpful in some ways. Wide square with Chiron and Libra. Chiron squaring the sun. Again, this idea of being fair and balanced. And it'd be interesting to look at what happened 15 years after the CDC was started. So that would have been, 1961. I haven't looked into the history of the CDC, but that's when 15 years later, the CDC would have gone through some kind of potential crisis, reorganization, overhaul. And then we have Mercury, Pluto, Moon, Venus, all in Leo. So that's kind of interesting, right? Like it would be an agency that would attract strong personalities. And, I like Leo a lot. Do I want my Center for Disease Control to be heavily invested in Leo? I don't know. I'm not sure. I mean, it can be grandstanding. The Pluto Moon conjunction is intense. It's very intense. And intense in a way that I don't think is always really healthy. It can be very obsessive. And in Leo, it's very controlling, super, super controlling. The other thing with the moon is that it can get into sort of like group psychology, collective psychology. Get that moth. Get him. It's right there. Get him. Take care of that moth. Don't let it go. You let it go. God, this cat is useless. And there's Mars and Virgo. So CDC, man, going to have its Mars return. So maybe it's going to flex its own Mars muscle. Maybe we'll see the CDC bring the hammer down with its Mars return. Interesting. Very interesting. Mars versus Mars. Water, Sun, Saturn, right? And the Sun is compromised, and Saturn, that's hard water, Saturn in Cancer. Yeah, not a lot of empathy. Not a lot of empathy with the CDC, and the empathy that it could channel could be very false with that Sun, Neptune square, the exaggeration with Jupiter, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, there you go. There's your rough CDC chart, and give you some idea as to the roots. It's interesting because it's July 1st, which means it's going to be in conjunction with the U.S. Sun. It's a very interesting time to start an agency, to start something like the CDC, because it's intertwined with the astrology of the United States, for sure. Pluto opposition. Like Pluto's in opposition with the CDC Saturn. And it's coming back. It's coming back into that opposition. It's going to be very interesting. So one of the things it could do, it could either, be in need of a significant overhaul with the Pluto opposition to Saturn, or, they can use it to potentially grab more power. We'll see what happens here, because it's going to go retrograde. It's going to hit that opposition one more time. And when is that? Let's just find out real quick here. Pluto, it's this year. So transiting Pluto is in opposition right now to the CDC, right? So right now, it's just Pluto is at 25 degrees. It's retrograde. Pluto's currently retrograde. And it went into opposition with the Saturn of the CDC at the end of June. So it's there now, right? And then it's going to come back again and hit it one more time. So they're either going to go through some kind of internal transformation and overhaul, or they'll take on more power. And sometimes the two are synonymous. Let's hope it's the former versus the latter. Okay, we're out of here. Where are we? Right there, right there, right there. Yep. Right there. Yeah. Let's see what we have here. Please try again later. Let's see. Let me say something. Hello. There we go. Okay. I have two Aries cats. They are demons. She's a little bit of a demon. She's my little demon. Looks like chat is disconnected. All right. I'm going to go. Okay. We're out of here. I'll be back tomorrow on the 15 Minutes of Flame channel. Use your head in order to discern what's real in your heart, discern what's possible. Thanks for being here. Sunday night AstroLive. Stop by my website, robertphoenix.com. If you're interested in having a reading with me, you can still do that.